It was August 14, 1971, at 2:30 in the morning, on the Paramount Studios lot in Los Angeles. Steve McQueen had just finished a brutal 14-hour night shoot filming racing sequences for Le Mans. He was exhausted, physically drained, and wanted nothing more than to get home to his family. Instead of calling for his normal car, Steve climbed into the Porsche 917 race car they'd been filming with all night. The actual race car, the one that cost over $1 million, the one that could reach 240 miles per hour. He started the engine, that distinctive flat 12 roar echoing across the empty lot, and aimed for the studio exit. What he didn't know was that the night shift security team didn't recognize him, didn't know who was driving that race car at 2:30 in the morning, and had just made a decision that would end their careers. Within 90 seconds, Steve would be threading $1 million race car through a gap measured in inches at 140 miles per hour, while security guards dove for their lives. This is not a story about cars, or speed, or even about recklessness. This is about living authentically, refusing to slow down for people who don't understand you, and what happens when you try to put barriers in front of someone who's spent their entire life going through them. In 1971, film studios had strict security protocols. Everything that entered or left studio property was logged, checked, verified. After normal business hours, security was even tighter. Nobody came or went without authorization. Guards had the authority to stop any vehicle, demand identification, verify purpose. This system existed to protect expensive equipment, prevent theft, and maintain studio safety. Security teams took their job seriously, because studios took security seriously. If something went wrong on your watch, you were fired immediately. The protocols were clear and absolute. Steve McQueen had been making Le Mans for over a year. The production had been chaotic, over budget, and professionally exhausting. Steve wasn't just starring in the film, he was effectively producing it, had significant creative control, and had insisted on using real race cars and filming actual racing at dangerous speeds. The film was his obsession, his attempt to capture authentic racing on screen in ways no one had done before. It was consuming his life, his marriage, and his sanity. 14-hour night shoots were normal. 20-hour days happened regularly. The line between Steve the actor and Steve the race car driver had completely blurred. On this particular night, they'd been filming at the studio lot, using the Porsche 917 for close-up cockpit shots and some technical sequences. The 917 was Steve's favorite car from the production, a genuine Le Mans race car, capable of extraordinary speed, incredibly difficult to drive. Steve had spent months learning to handle it properly. He was comfortable in that car in ways most professional racers never achieved. When filming wrapped at 2:15 a.m., Steve was too wired to sleep despite the exhaustion. The adrenaline from driving that machine, even at relatively low speeds on the studio lot, was still pumping through his system. His assistant approached as Steve was leaving the soundstage. "Steve, your car is here to take you home." "Don't need it," Steve said, walking toward the Porsche 917 still sitting on the lot where they'd been filming. "I'm taking this. That's a race car. You can't drive that on public streets. Watch me." Steve climbed into the cockpit, started the engine, and felt that familiar vibration, that mechanical symphony of 12 cylinders firing. The exhaustion evaporated. He was alive again. The studio lot at night was empty, the roads between sound stages clear. Steve drove slowly at first, getting reacquainted with the car's responses, feeling the steering, the throttle, the brutal immediacy of a machine built only for speed. By the time he approached the main exit gate, he was doing about 40 miles per hour. Fast for a studio lot, but nothing compared to what that car could do. The night shift security team at the main gate consisted of 3 guards. 2 were stationed at the checkpoint, with the barrier arm. 1 was in the guard booth, monitoring cameras. They'd been working at Paramount for years, knew most of the regular employees, recognized faces and vehicles. At 2:30 a.m., they expected nothing. The lot was supposed to be empty, except for a few overnight production crews. Then they heard it, a sound like nothing else on Earth. The Porsche 917's engine at moderate speed was louder than most cars at full throttle. The guards looked at each other. "What the hell is that?" one asked. They saw headlights approaching fast. As the car got closer, they realized it was a race car, an actual race car, on the studio lot at 2:30 in the morning. "That's not authorized," the senior guard said, reaching for his radio. "Central, we have an unauthorized vehicle approaching main gate. Appears to be a race car. Request immediate backup." The guard in the booth responded, "A race car? How did a race car get on the lot?" "Don't know, but it's coming fast. I'm raising the barrier." "Negative. Do not let that vehicle leave. Could be theft in progress. Stop that car." The senior guard's training kicked in. "Unauthorized vehicle, possible theft. Orders to stop." He radioed to the second checkpoint, 50 yards beyond the main gate. "Deploy spike strip. Stop that vehicle. Use force if necessary." At the second checkpoint, 2 guards scrambled to position a spike strip across the exit road. These strips were designed to puncture tires on vehicles trying to breach security. "Deploy it." Vehicle hits it. Tires shred. Vehicle stops. Standard protocol. Inside the Porsche 917, Steve saw the barrier arm at the main gate starting to rise, then stopping halfway. He saw guards moving with purpose, talking into radios. He realized they weren't recognizing him, weren't treating this as a star leaving after a night shoot. They were treating this as a security incident. Steve had 2 options: stop the car, get out, explain who he was, deal with paperwork and questions for an hour while exhausted, or don't stop. He downshifted, accelerated, and aimed for the gap under the half-raised barrier arm. The 917 was low, incredibly low. The barrier was high enough. Barely. Steve punched the throttle, and the flat 12 engine howled as the car launched forward. The guards at the main checkpoint dove aside as the Porsche 917 screamed past them at what they estimated was 60 miles per hour, threading through a gap that looked impossibly small. "He's through. He's through the main gate." The senior guard shouted into his radio. "Spike strip deployed at secondary. He's coming right at you." Steve saw the second checkpoint ahead, saw the spike strip stretched across the road, saw the guard standing behind the barrier, confident this would stop the vehicle. He had about 3 seconds to make a decision: hit the brakes, destroy the car, and possibly himself, or find another way through. Steve's racing instincts took over. He saw what the guards didn't. There was a gap. The spike strip stretched across most of the road, but there was a narrow space between the end of the strip and the guard booth, maybe 3 feet wide. The Porsche 917 was 7 feet wide at its widest point, but the cockpit area, where Steve sat, was narrower, and Steve had spent a year learning to place this car exactly where he wanted it at race speeds. He downshifted again, accelerated hard, and aimed for that gap. The guards saw what he was attempting and couldn't believe it. "He's not stopping," one shouted. "He's going to try to..." The Porsche 917 hit 140 miles per hour in the 50 yards between checkpoints. At that speed, at night, threading through a gap, measured in inches, required absolute precision and zero fear. Steve had both. The guards dove away from the booth as the silver race car screamed toward them. Steve held the line perfectly. The Porsche's left side cleared the spike strip by approximately 4 inches. The right side cleared the guard booth by maybe 6 inches. At 140 miles per hour, the car punched through the gap like a bullet. the engine sound reverberating off the guard booth walls and blasted out of the studio gates onto the public street. The security guards picked themselves up off the ground, staring at the taillights disappearing into the Los Angeles night. The spike strip was untouched. The guard booth was undamaged. The car was gone. The senior guard grabbed his radio with shaking hands. "Vehicle is off property. Repeat, vehicle is off property." "Did you get a plate number?" Central asked. "Negative. Too fast. But it was a Porsche 97 Silver, Gulf livery." There was a pause. Then Central's voice came back, quieter. "Gulf livery? You're telling me that was the race car from the Le Mans production?" "Yes. That's what it looked like." Another pause. Longer this time. "Steve McQueen is starring in Le Mans. That car belongs to the production. You just tried to stop Steve McQueen with a spike strip." The implications hit everyone simultaneously. They hadn't stopped an unauthorized vehicle. They'd nearly killed one of the biggest movie stars in the world while he was driving studio property after working a night shoot. The silence on the radio was absolute. Everyone knew what this meant. At 7:30 a.m., the head of Paramount Studios security arrived at his office to find footage from the night's incident queued up on his monitor. Someone had been in early specifically to make sure he saw this. He watched the security camera angles, watched the Porsche 97 approach the main gate, watched his guards scramble, watched them deploy the spike strip, watched Steve McQueen thread a $1 million race car through a gap that shouldn't have been possible at speeds that were insane. Then he watched Steve do it successfully and disappear into the night. The security chief called an emergency meeting. By 9 a.m., the entire night shift team was assembled. "Can any of you explain to me," the chief began, his voice dangerously quiet, "how you didn't recognize Steve McQueen leaving the studio after a night shoot in a car from his own production?" The senior guard tried to defend the decision. "Sir, it was 2:30 a.m. The car was unauthorized on the lot roads. Protocol says—" "Protocol," the chief interrupted, "says know who works on your lot. Steve McQueen has been here almost every day for a year filming Le Mans. You didn't recognize him. You deployed a spike strip that could have killed him. You treated our biggest star like a car thief. The car was moving fast. We couldn't see. At what point did you think race car on the lot at 2:30 a.m. during a racing film production might be related to that production?" The guards had no answer. "We could have had Steve McQueen killed on this lot. We could have destroyed a $1 million race car. The studio could have been sued for negligence. Your careers are over. All of you, pack your belongings." By noon, the entire night shift security team had been terminated. By 1 p.m., studio executives were calling Steve's people trying to apologize and make sure Steve wasn't going to sue. Steve's response, relayed through his assistant, was characteristically direct. "Don't hire people who don't recognize their own talent. And maybe don't put spike strips where your employees are driving." The story spread through Hollywood in hours. Steve McQueen drove a Porsche 917 through studio security at 40 miles per hour and got the entire security team fired. Some versions said he'd done it deliberately to test security. Others said it was exhaustion-induced recklessness. People who knew Steve understood the truth. He'd been too tired to deal with protocol, too alive in that car to stop when someone told him to, and possessed enough skill to thread an impossible gap at impossible speed, because that's what he did. He was Steve McQueen. Paramount Studios implemented new protocol. Security teams were required to know the faces of all major stars and directors working on the lot. Photos were posted in guard booths. License plates were pre-authorized. The goal was ensuring that what happened with Steve never happened again. Steve's relationship with Paramount Security was icy for months afterward, but gradually, the new guards came to respect him, not just as a star but as someone who'd proven you shouldn't bet against him. Some guards who'd been hired to replace the fired team eventually became friends with Steve, bonding over cars and racing. They understood what the night shift had missed. Steve McQueen didn't follow normal rules because he wasn't living a normal life. Le Mans was released in 1971. The film was financially disappointing but became a cult classic among racing enthusiasts for its authenticity. Steve had sacrificed his marriage, his health, and nearly his life to make it as real as possible. That night, driving through security at 40 miles per hour was consistent with everything else about the production. No shortcuts, no compromises, absolute commitment to living in the moment. Years later, someone asked Steve about the incident. You risked your life and $1 million race car over not wanting to stop for security. Was it worth it? Steve's response was pure McQueen. Stopping meant dealing with paperwork and questions when I was exhausted. Going through meant I was home in 15 minutes. I knew I could make that gap. The guards didn't know I could. That's their problem, not mine. The security guards, who were fired, never worked in film industry security again. The incident became part of their permanent records. Fired for attempting to spike strip Steve McQueen wasn't something you could explain away in interviews. Some felt the termination was unfair. They'd been following protocol, doing their jobs, protecting studio property. Others admitted they should have recognized the situation for what it was, a star leaving after work in a production vehicle. The gap between those perspectives was the same gap Steve drove through at 40. Today, the story is legendary among racing enthusiasts and film industry workers. Footage of Steve threading the Porsche 917 through that checkpoint doesn't exist publicly, if it exists at all, but the security camera angles are rumored to be stored in Paramount's archives. The gap he drove through was measured the next day, 33 inches between the spike strip and the guard booth. The Porsche 917's cockpit width at its narrowest was 31 inches, 2 inches of clearance, total, at 140 miles per hour, in the dark, after 14 hours of filming. That's not luck. That's skill meeting nerve at exactly the right moment. If this story of speed, skill and refusing to stop moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that some people are built to go through obstacles instead of around them, that expertise looks reckless to those who don't understand it, and that sometimes the fastest way home is straight through whatever's in your way. Have you ever refused to stop when everyone expected you to? Share your story in the comments.